this research project is being carried out by 4 of us, Jose, who is with me, and we have 2 more people here, which are Mauro Villacres and Marta, and they are not accompanying us today because obviously we need to split and make it short for you guys. And the research we are carrying out is, as you can see in the title, English language teaching in intercultural bilingual schools. And it's a case from Cañar, which is a province here in Ecuador, a southern province that is mainly that mainly includes indigenous groups, okay? And that's the main focus that we have in our research. So this is the agenda we're gonna follow, okay? I'll be talking about the intro, the objectives, a brief historical overview of these special communities, and a little bit on the theoretical approaches. And then Jose will take the floor and talk about the challenges in teaching, in English teaching for these schools, the methodology of our research, the proposed pedagogical model that we are carrying out in the project, and the conclusions, okay? So let me introduce you to Cañar and our country, right? So on the picture, you can see Ecuador, and it's a very small country, but it's really rich in a special culture, right? So here in red, you can see the province of Cañar, as you can see, is in the southern part of our country, and is mainly is in the highlands. So it includes indigenous groups corresponding to that type of weather, right? So to let you know about the foundation for this study, I will, as you can see in the notes, let you know that intercultural bilingual education, or IBE, right, is a model that goes beyond simply teaching in 2 languages. In this case, is Quechua and English, right? It is rooted in integrating indigenous worldviews, traditions, values, and languages into the educational process. It seeks to ensure that the students not only learn in their native language, but also see their identity and culture reflected in the curriculum they are having. This study is being conducted in the city of the same name, which is Cañar, okay? And it has gone through 3 historical stages that I will introduce to you in a minute. The first one that comes from 1906 to 1980, the second one from 1980 to 2008, and from 2008 that we had a big change to 2024, okay? Despite the major policy reforms, there is still a major gap. The teaching of English often fails to reflect the cultural, linguistic, realities of Quechua Spanish bilingual students. So this study emerges from the need to question and to understand how English is taught in these schools specifically, and whether the methods that are being used are truly inclusive and culturally relevant. So from these necessities, okay, the objectives of our research were guided by these main 4 objectives, right? So the first one, to analyze and characterize English, okay, teaching in intercultural bilingual schools in Cañar. Also, the second objective would be to trace the historical evolution of English teaching, okay, within the broader framework of IBE. Our third objective was to identify methodological gaps in current practices in teaching English. And finally, obviously, to culturally responsive methodologies, okay, that will value bilingualism, right, in Quechua and Spanish, and obviously to offer meaningful ways to teach English to build students' real-world experiences. So really brief, I'll let you know how this evolution has gone through. So first of all, in the first phase from 1906 to 1980, okay, this was obviously the beginning stage, okay? Ecuador took initial steps toward recognizing indigenous education, which is a very big step. Some schools were created for indigenous children, but unfortunately, their purpose was often assimilation rather than cultural preservation. So these schools focus on teaching Spanish and promoting national identity, often at the cost of local languages and traditions. English during this period was virtually absent. There was not in the curriculum. It was not considered relevant or necessary for indigenous communities, of course, and as a result, there was no meaningful inclusion of English to design or delivery of bilingual education, right? Then for our second phase, okay, from 1980 to 2008, okay, in this second stage, one of the most important developments that we had was the creation of MOSAIC that you can see here, okay, which was a model of intercultural bilingual education. It was implemented in 1993, okay, and this model was significant. It was a very significant shift. It recognized the value of indigenous languages and cultures and introduced pedagogical tools called cucayos. Okay, these were teaching guides written in ancestral languages like Quechua. So this model, MOSAIC, emphasized identity, territory, community, and it was a step forward in promoting education that is culturally situated. However, of course, the introduction of English was left behind, and what we had was a kind of a book that simulated the teaching of English, a very scarce book, but of course, having English language, that was the Our World Through English book, okay? And it was a series that was adopted as a material, that it was standardized for all the schools, but they didn't take into account, again, the linguistic realities, the cultural values, and then obviously, in this case, experiences of indigenous students. So then obviously it was still left behind on this specific spot, right? Finally, here in this last phase, we have something that was kind of an institutional consolidation, okay? The government of our country in that time created the DINAVE, okay, which was the National Directorate of Intercultural Bilingual Education, okay, and strengthened the legal framework of IBE, of Intercultural Bilingual Education. So textbooks in English were introduced as an advanced project, and this included a lot of really nice materials for students, like postcards, and also the book that was called Viewpoint, which was, these books were very modern, and the most important thing is that linguistically more diverse, okay? However, obviously, many of the problems persisted, and these resources still tend to be very urban-centered, not reflecting, again, the social cultural context of our rural indigenous communities. And more critically, there was a major gap in teacher training. That was a spot that we didn't assume in the beginning, okay? And obviously, educators in rural schools, for bilingual education, often had limited access to ongoing professional development or English teaching. Sorry, what happened in here? What happened? Give me a second. I don't know what happened. Okay, once again, here. Okay, so that was basically what happened during these phases, okay? And let me show you the theoretical approaches. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do. Yes, we see it. We see the presentation.
Okay, yeah, I was scared because we lost something there. Okay, so theoretical approaches. Okay, talking about the theoretical approaches, what I can tell you is that there are some that we have explored, okay, basically are the ones that you can read on this slide, okay? And we have these as basis for our research, right? So behaviorism, which we all know is mostly talking about repetitive practices and audiolingual methods to make students more passive than productive, right? Then obviously talking about constructivism, which is something that was more student-centered, okay? And it has communication, more production on communication approaches. And the third is multiple intelligences, that was aligning with the students' strengths. And you know that this is based on Howard Gardner's framework. And this theory suggests that learners have different kinds of intelligences, and so not just linguistic or logical, right? So in the context of indigenous communities, which is what matters to us today, okay, the approaches that we have to get through with them, thank you, okay, is naturalistic, musical, body-licking aesthetic. This is something that we have been discovered with our study that carrying out. So they are particularly relevant to this study as they connect the traditional knowledge and the community life that they have. So this theory allows us to design lessons that are respecting actually their views, their traditions, their culture, that value their diversity. And obviously, this is something that we would have to emphasize, because these three theoretical pillars form the basis of our analysis and the support of our vision from a more culturally responsive English teaching model. So I'm going to let Jose continue with the next part of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Paola. Hi, everyone there. Well, talking about our methodology, what the methodology that we use for this research, well, it's a qualitative research with a qualitative approach, because we started first with the document analysis and interviews. The documents all regarding about two policies, and interviews with students to know their perceptions, and also with the teachers that are actually working in these institutions. And after that, of course, we focus on identifying the gaps and perhaps some opportunities for cultural responsive teaching when we talk about English teaching, of course. After all this analysis, after all of these interviews, well, this is what we found. First, that there are some challenges actually in this type of institutions. We're talking about intercultural bilingual institutions. Well, they are bilingual because they're working with the two languages that are official now in Ecuador, Spanish and also Quechua, which is one of the ancestral languages here. And what happens is, well, first, according to the policies that we have in Ecuador for this type of education, it is supposed that all the teachers have to introduce the culture of the students in the process. It could be part of their cosmovisions, talking about some of their traditions, or even if it's possible to be part of some of the cultural or the community's tradition with a group of students in some projects. Well, what happens in this case is that the curriculum of English doesn't consider that part, because it's mainly designed as a whole group country, considering like an homogeneous group, but without taking into account these particular cultural differences of the students. Additional, one of the challenges is that on the training for the English teachers are actually focused on those institutions that are in the urban area of the community, in this case of the province of Cañar. So what happens is that these institutions, the intercultural bilingual institutions, they have a different training program for the teachers of the different areas, in which, of course, English teachers are part sometimes, but still it is not the same, or it's a little bit different, or lacks of relevance for these kind of institutions. And finally, which I think consider is also a big challenge, is the limited technological materials for teachers and for students, which it's a challenge in this case for the people who are teaching to try to adapt the materials that they have just for what they have, because they have only a book and the board. But sometimes they have a lab in some of the institutions, but they are not using it. It's only for those other subjects which they consider a little bit more relevant than English in these institutions. Apart of that, well, the thing is that we found that most of the teachers, talking about 90% of them who work in these institutions, they are not actually, or they were not trained or prepared to be English teachers. For instance, in one of the intercultural bilingual institutions, we discovered that first, they assigned, well, the authorities, they assigned the number of hours for different teachers, like mathematics, they have a certain number of hours, science, they have a certain number of hours, and they need to first give these main areas to the teachers who were trained or prepared for that, who studied to become mathematics teachers. Then, if these teachers do not have enough hours to justify their work, so they assign extra hours. Could be some art classes to these teachers and including English classes to these teachers who first were not prepared or did not study to become English teachers. And actually, of course, that what happens with that is that they have a limited knowledge of the different approaches for teaching English in this case. So that's one of the main challenges in this type of institutions. At the same time, these teachers and it's curious because in these institutions, they are supposed to be working like 50% of teachers, 50% bilingual teachers who speak Quechua, because they give more relevance to this type of professionals who speak Quechua. Remember that the intention of intercultural bilingual education is to prioritize, the ancestral languages and the community's culture. And some of the English teachers, they are not well prepared with this concept of intercultural bilingual education. They work there, but they are not like aligned with this ideology of the intercultural bilingual education, which of course leads to a limited use of cultural elements from the indigenous community in the language teaching, in this case, English teaching.
I wanted to chime in with a 5-minute warning, please.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Thank you. And so after this, we think that it would be good if we, as part of the research project, can provide a pedagogical model for these institutions based on some of the approaches that my colleague just mentioned before, and also based on the main concepts of intercultural bilingual education, to first guide or provide a guide to the teachers, and also to measure if it somehow helps to improve the quality of teaching in these institutions. So our intention with this pedagogical model is to train teachers first with, of course, a well-designed program of training in some of the different methodologies for English teaching, to train these teachers with the use of technology and somehow help them to see how to adapt these materials and how also to include the indigenous culture at the same time while they are teaching a language. It is a challenge also because some of the teachers mentioned that it's hard for them to introduce some of the concepts, like there's a unit that talks about traveling by airports, while these communities are not like, they don't have a knowledge of that, or it's something that it's new for them. So they say, I don't know how to do it because we have to teach this vocabulary is important because we have to assess that at the end. So that's what we consider to be a good part of our model. And of course, what we want with this model is also to provide a guideline, not only for these institutions, but perhaps for the rest of the teachers, because as Ecuador is a multicultural country, so we have indigenous students not only in these type of institutions, but in the whole country. Perhaps in some institutions, the number of indigenous students will be very, very small, but still we have this type of students here. And of course, when we want to create this pedagogical model, we have to first set the objective. We have to base our pedagogical model in a theoretical foundation. we have to think about the system of activities and the didactic materials for English teachers, the teacher training, as I said, with seminars, workshops, practical sessions, the validation and evaluation of the model at the end to see if it actually has an impact, a positive impact in these institutions. Well, so the conclusions, we have that current English teaching in intercultural bilingual educations here in Ecuador does not reflect a student's cultural identity. We need a didactic model that can combine interculturality and constructivism at the same time to improve the teaching practices in these institutions. And also, an inclusive education requires the alignment between language policies and the classroom practices. These are some references that we use for our research, and it's important to mention that it's only the first stage of our project, because the second stage would be to design and implement this pedagogical model, and then we'll be happy if we can share it with you again, the results and all that. Thank you so much.